it's not easy to come back after the coffee, and I see all these networking ongoing already, but let's have a look what you left as a message, which global trends will have the biggest impact on the future of the EU by 2040. And I mean, I think many of you seem to agree there will be climate change, migration, demographics, which we heard in the first session already. So, and I see global warming, a lot about climate, migration, AI. I think we haven't even touched that topic yet. So, welcome back. So, yeah, thank you. Demographics, climate change, migration, AI. I think you have touched upon a number of important topics. I would like to just to mention that all the information, including the results of the Slidos and all the live stream, will be available on the ESPAS website. And let us now go to the third and final session of the. This morning on globalization and deglobalisation, the future of economic power. And I would like to welcome our speakers. First of all, I'd like to welcome, and I will ask you to come on stage a bit later, but it's Kazumasa Iwata, who is the president of the Japan Center for Economic Research, former deputy governor of the Bank of Japan. We thank you, Mr. Iwata, for making the long journey from Japan to be with us today. We have as well Jean Pisani-Ferry, who is the senior fellow at Bruegel and a non-resident senior fellow at the Peterson Institute and a well-known figure in Brussels. Thank you. We have Maria de Mertzis. Yes, Maria, senior fellow at Bruegel as well and part-time professor for economic policy. And thank you to be back on the ESPAS platform, Maria. And our moderator is Kim Jorgensen, Director General and European Investment Bank Permanent Representative to the EU institutions in Brussels. Thank you, and please join me on stage together with Sylvain. Thank you for joining.
So, thanks a lot, and thanks to all of you for coming back after the coffee. The previous session was a bit grim, I have to say. I don't know if we will be less grim in this session. We will look at the the economic aspects of the increased global fragmentation that we just heard about, and of course the increased tensions between the US and China, but also looking a little bit at the rise in populism and greater skepticism towards globalization, and of course during the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine, we have already seen a testing of the international economic governance.
It's a grim introduction.
Sorry?
It's a fairly grim introduction.
Yeah, but I mean, you have to then be less grim. But we will see in the discussion. One thing that was not mentioned so much in the first panel, of course, at least, is fighting climate change, where it's very difficult for me, actually, also having worked both in the Commission as a Danish perm rep to EU, to see us doing things without China. So, but all of this I would leave to you, and you have introduced the colleagues and the panelists, so if I can start with you, Kazumasa Iwata, very many thanks for you to come all the way to Brussels, and drawing a little bit on your huge international experience. How are you seeing then the future of the relationship between the US and China? And also if you could bring in to your response a little bit the demographic challenges of China, which I don't think we touched so much about in the previous round. Yesterday, we talked a little bit about this much quoted speech about small yards and huge fences, where you said in Japan you have a tradition for wide yards and small fences, and I would say we at the EU level have a tradition for huge yards and no fences. I think we all have to adjust, but in what ways should we adjust, and how are you looking at it from Japan? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, the very kind introduction. First of all, let me express my gratitude to Director General Mr. Quest, who invited me to participate in this ESPAS meeting for the first time. I enjoyed the previous session's discussion, more serious engagement by European Union in the Indo-Pacific region. So, and I want to take up two issues. One of them is the US-China economic rivalry. How about the future of this rivalry? And another one is the open regionalism in Indo-Pacific and the trade strategy by the European Union in this Indo-Pacific region. I want to talk about these two issues. The first one, our center, Japan Center for Economic Research, engages in providing long-term forecast. Every 5 years, we provide the long-term forecast of world economy, 2007, 2014, 2019. And we now prepare for next year. We prepare the 2075 world economy. That's far away and great uncertainty. But recently, the Goldman Sachs published, the 75, economic forecast, very far future. According to this forecast, Big Five is taken by 3 Asian countries, China, of course, India, and Indonesia. And from Africa, Nigeria. And of course, China remain, and the United States. These are big five in the year 2075. If the Goldman Sachs prediction is correct, and Japan is moving down. So that's quite unfortunate. But I find in their exercise, India and Indonesia is extremely important for the future of global economy and the international economic order and others, So I want to say about this long-term forecast, we engaged this forecasting work and already 3 times. And really I find US and China's economic rivalry almost 50-50 competition, Sometimes we provide it. China will catch up with the United States in the early 2030. But afterwards, United States restore the dominance close to the 2050. Or another scenario, we are recently preparing that China will not catch up, with the United States forever. So I'm inclined to take this view now. We are now still in a preparatory stage, but we find there had been a sharp decline of economic performance of China. I think there are two big reasons. One of them is the policy regime change under Xi Jinping. Under Xi Jinping, the economic policy making is based on Communist Party-centered economic policy making. This is a significant deviation from the traditional opening market or opening policy under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping, started 1978. This is a very sharp turnaround. China has a strong aspect and a weak aspect. I find one of the most weak aspects is the poor quality of various institutions, economic institutions and social institutions and political institutions. So if we watch this now, I think sharp turnaround of the Xi Jinping's policy is based on this poor institution. So this is one reason why performance declined very sharply recently. Second one is Corona crisis. There had been a mishandling. Of course, this is related to the policy-making process in China. But at the same time, 2022, United Nations population statistics made a sharp downward adjustment over the future population development and the birth rate. For a long time period, we is heavily relying on this United Nations population forecast in providing our forecast. But now we find, or maybe United Nations overestimated, actual state of population and the birth rate. Sharp decline, both birth rate and the future development of population. So one of the reasons may be related to the Corona crisis, too much, stringent control on the movement of people and the commerce and activities. But at the same time, demographic changes, serious impact on Chinese economy. Recently, I had the occasion to talk with a Chinese expert a couple of months ago. I found this is for the first time when we had the meeting. They usually provide very strong scenario. Oh, we can continue. Before they say 10%. Now slightly down, but 7% always possible, something like that. But on the last previous expert meeting, I find the Chinese expert taking a more pessimistic view than the Japanese expert, on the future of Chinese economy. And they are afraid of the risk of Japanification. We suffered for a long time secular stagnation after the bubble burst, already 30 years, and still we cannot completely move out from this stagnation. And so my understanding that China's performance would be not so good over the future. This is what I want to say. First thing, and the second one, maybe I come back later.
If you can come back
on
on the second, very much.
Okay, yeah.
But a very interesting observation also from the region. And then if I can move to you, Jean, and then also going back to the rivalry between the US and China. And right now, we have taken a much firmer stance, at least I think at EU levels since starting in 19, and certainly in the last couple of years, we are now looking at all these de-risking strategies. But how do you see that also with your experience from the Peterson Institute in Washington? Is there a risk that we are just copying the Americans? How should our approach be, and how also do you see the BRICS states in this respect? Thank you.
Hello? It's working, sorry. Thank you. I'm happy to be here, and it's an important discussion. I think I'll go back first to this small yard, high fence concept, which, in my view, has a very clear significance. That's to separate out what the field where China is considered sufficiently strong, a dangerous rival for the US to protect to avoid critical technologies to be transferred to China, and the rest in which there should be a normal relationship, including competition, obviously, but a normal relationship, including a relationship of cooperation on global commons. And I think that's really the defining tensions of the times we're in, that there is geopolitical rivalry, there is fragmentations, we're not in the same sort of mindset overall, but they need to cooperate on global commons, and the need to maintain, to avoid catastrophic deglobalisation with all the costs it may entail is there. And the question really for all countries, for all participants in the global economy, is how to manage this. It's completely different from the world we knew before, where we thought that everything was going in the same direction. Political convergence, economic convergence, identical systems, etc. And so there would be convergence toward a single template. It's not this world anymore. Now, does this mean we can't cooperate? And I think it does not. It does not because at the same time when this fragmentation is taking place, the significance of global commons is increasing. Climate is a very good case of it, but also biodiversity, but also the digital dimension and the risk of artificial intelligence. All that are somehow global problems, and on these global problems there needs to be a cooperation. And is there a way all that can be combined? I think there is, and if you look in detail at the various fields in which there can be some, there are relations, and there can be different successes or failures, it's interesting to see that in certain fields, things are going uniformly badly. I mean, take trade. I mean, the trade system, the global trading system is unraveling. There is no doubt about that. And the US doesn't want to be part of a system that's based on the most favored nation clause, meaning that they would have to give China whatever they give to Germany. And they're saying that quite explicitly. If you take finance, you have also this attempt by China to build a parallel global financial system. But if you take what's happening in climate, at the time the Paris Agreement was signed, economists were extremely skeptical about the way it could transform things. They were saying, just to name a famous colleague, Jean Tirole explicitly said, this agreement is nothing. It's worse than nothing. It's actually worse than nothing. And in fact, we're seeing some efficacy of the Paris Agreement. We're seeing, some momentum. We're seeing we have this very weird system of nationally determined contributions, but in fact, it gives something. And if I take, and I'm going to end here, something very, very technical, there are fields in which cooperation is going on because it's isolated from political pressure, from political visibility. So if you take a field like competition policy, it's remarkable that without any institutional framework, you still have this capacity for the EU to take decisions that have big impact on US companies, and somehow, this implicit rules are recognized by most participants. So I think, there are some elements of hopes. And since you, gave the instruction, let's try not to be grim, let me end on this note.
I didn't say we shouldn't be grim, but at least it was grim in the first session. Now at least with a few nuances. Maybe now moving, Maria, to the role of international finance. You have recently worked on digital currencies and macroeconomics. And how would you see this when it comes to, is it a disruption factor or is it more like a positive evolution? What's your take on this?
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much for the invitation first, and of course for the question. And the short answer to your question is it is both. It is both a disruption and it is a positive evolution. But just like with everything, I think there are negative sides to it. And because the digitalization is a borderless activity, the ramifications of things going wrong are global. They're not local, and they could be cumulative, so they could be big. So there is an element of trying to get the best out of the technology, but with making sure that we are not introducing risks to the environment. So I want to comment on two things, which is basically the big ingredients for the digital finance are the crypto, and what we call the crypto, the bitcoins of this world, and then the latest kid in town, which is the central bank digital currencies, which are all part of this technology. On the crypto side, I'm personally very excited by the technology behind this the cryptocurrencies. When the blockchain first came out and the decentralized system, that is an incredible innovation. Almost too good to be true, and actually I think it is too good to be true. It isn't as good as the promise of decentralization, because there is the issue of accountability behind it that is absolutely essential. And in fact, in the past few years, a couple of things that we've learned when it comes to the digitalization of finance is that there are no shortcuts. I think with I don't know if any of you are following the collapses that have happened in the crypto world the past 2 years, the FTX being the most obvious one, but then also the Terra Luna, which was another cryptocurrency that was created, became a bubble and then collapsed. But all of these things had something in common, and is that the shortcuts to finance don't work. You need reserves, you need regulation, and you need trust. All of these things, one of these, or possibly more than one things, went wrong in these occasions, and that is why the whole thing collapsed. And I'm not even talking about malignant type of behavior, which obviously some of them also had. And on the regulation side, I think there is no way of having a regulation that doesn't have a global reach, given that you're talking about global issues here. MiCA, when it came, was very welcome, and I think it does actually, just like in competition, has got the possibility of becoming a global standard in terms of creating a market that is both legitimate but needs to be regulated according to everything else. Then there is the newest thing, which is the central bank digital currencies, the digital euro. We had the regulatory suggestion the regulation put forward by the European Commission. It will not be decided in this cycle. It will have to go to the next one. I will say maybe two things on this in the first round, and we can talk a little bit more about the global aspects of it later on. The motivation for having central bank digital currencies is not the same across the world. Those countries that do have central bank currencies already in operation are countries who are trying to promote digital and financial inclusion. This issue in Europe, in the US, in Japan is much of less relevance, so we don't have an issue of financial inclusion. There's other motivations here, including the process of digitalization itself. We're going to have more and more in digital payments. We don't have our own European payment companies that run payment systems in Europe. So the CBDCs, the way that the European Central Bank are arguing it, has got a very different motivation of financial inclusion. But to be frank, I don't believe that you and I are going to see many differences. If we were to have a digital euro in our pocket or in our digital pocket today, we wouldn't really see a very big difference in the current. As a consumer, we won't really see the value added of it. However, where we will see the value added of it is in what we call the wholesale CBDC, basically the way that payments are being done between banks across borders. By that I mean across currencies globally. There, both the information that we have already is that there are huge benefits to be had both in time and costs, but actually there is also potentially a revolution happening on the wholesale CBDCs in the way that global payments happen globally. For the moment, the world relies on the euro and on the dollar primarily for any financial flows. If we were to have wholesale CBDCs in operation, and I say if and when, because this is not for tomorrow, we would have a possible revolution in the global payment system, because we could bypass the dollar and we could bypass what we call the big currencies, the big tradable currencies. This is possibly a revolution, and I think we are getting there. As Jean said, there is China that is trying to create an alternative financial system. They are very much advanced on the EU one, their own central bank digital currency. And I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to create an international settlement system that is going to challenge the hegemony of the big currencies. This is something that geopolitically is of great importance in my view and could be revolutionary.
Thank you very much. And then if we move to the second round, if allow me, I will start with you, Jean, and also looking at the enormous financial needs for the green transition. We all know that we cannot get to 2050. Also with the current technologies, we need huge finance. And we need also cooperation at that level, but maybe also to add something at EU level. We have not enough equity like in the States. How can you see that we can crowd in more private money at EU level to help us getting to succeed with the green transition?
Thank you. Let's start with some simple concept and numbers. First of all, why is it that the green transition requires so much investment? And so much investment meaning roughly 2% of GDP per year for 20 years, let's say, or so. So which is a really significant increase in the total investment, or at least a really significant reallocation, because we don't know if it's going to be, a reallocation away from the investments that are being done, or additional investment. Now, the reason is simple to understand. Behind every technology that saves on fossil fuels, there is more capital. The simplest model of decarbonization is that you substitute capital for fossil fuels. And look at, everything from a windmill, a solar panel or a solar farm, or an electric dam, or a nuclear power plant, or a heat pump if you go down to the household level, or an electric vehicle. All that is more significant in terms of capital. So you have to pay the upfront cost first, and then down the road you save on operation costs. So that's a big revolution for any country, but it's obviously an extremely big challenge for poor countries, because poor countries, they don't have access to capital in the same way. They don't have access to private capital in the same way. So they don't have much savings. So there is a major problem with the capacity, the ability of global finance to contribute to the decarbonization in those countries. And you know that decarbonization will not take place if India is not on board, if South Africa is not on board. I mean, those are countries that rely massively on coal, and so there is a need really to think in terms of the financial engineering of bringing capital to those countries, which means de-risking investment. And those countries, they are unevenly, obviously it depends. I mean, India is a better risk than Africa, than African countries. But there is a need for everybody to reduce the risk premium so that they can actually get access to this capital. So this is a massive problem for the world, and a problem that the magnitude of which has started being realized, but we're still short of solutions. Obviously, the business model of the World Bank, of the multilateral development banks, of even the IMF will have to change in order to help bring this reduction in the risk premium.
Thanks a lot. I think this is a very important question. I think also for the next mandate here in Brussels and for the next cycle. I think this is extremely important. So, turning to you again, Maria, on how can we avoid that sort of security-enhancing call for more autonomy? For example, the EIA, we just talked about it before, will translate into economic costly protectionism. I mean, what shall we do? What will be the right response? And how do you see this debate?
Just on the strategic autonomy issue, I mean, I've never been a big fan of the word because it promotes it invokes protectionism, which in ways could be quite destructive. I much prefer the term de-risking, and I mean, I think what I like about de-risking is because it makes me think of management. I mean, if you said the first course, if you follow a management course, the first thing they tell you is that you need to ensure business continuity, and business continuity is how do I make sure I can still keep on working if my resources are minimized. And I think if you were to adopt a much more managerial approach to running the economy, the issue of diversification, the issue of de-risking, don't rely on one source for all your inputs, this becomes self-evident. So I much like this issue of de-risking. So if you were to sort of apply this managerial way to the economy, then it is very much about finding different resources, find different sources of our primary goods, what is strategic and what is not strategic, meaning you can't do without. That's what I mean by strategic. And then, of course, inevitably, some of it will have to be reshored. But it is being reshored for business continuity purposes, not necessarily for political reasons. And I think that is actually a much better narrative of understanding why we need to rethink about the economic model that we're having here. Then, if I may connect it also to the question that you asked now in terms of the issue of finding the capital for the investments, there is the transitions, the climate transition being the most important one, also because it's existential, but there is also the issue of the digital transition, massive investments that we need to make in this respect, keeping an eye that the de-risking needs to be part of that equation. The title of this conference is strategic choices, strategic investments should be part of that answer to the question. How do we pool resources in order to make sure that we can finance the future? You mentioned that there isn't private capital in Europe because we don't have very sophisticated capital markets in the way that the US does. So effectively what happens is that we don't have consumers investing in the private sector, in the private markets. Well, now it's the consumer that has to refinance these investments, but it will have to go through the sovereign. There isn't any other alternative. If you don't have the markets, it will be the sovereign that will have to do it. We're starting from a position of high debts. I mean, these are vulnerabilities that we have to meet and give and invest the 2% at least on all these transitions. So in my view, that what in Europe is absolutely essential is to think strategically about what is important and therefore is worth pulling resources for, and what is not strategic and therefore is not worth pulling resources for. So I think this is the bit that at least from inside the EU we can do, is this pooling resources, keeping in mind that there are strategic elements that need to be secured, including, of course, economic security.
Thank you very much. And then finally back to you, Kasimatu Iwata, and also taking into account maybe the previous colleagues, looking at the stage, you touched upon it briefly in your first intervention on the regionalizations of trade agreements, and how is there a chance of revitalizing the WTO, and how are you seeing the regionalization of trade?
Thank you very much. I want to talk about the open regionalism in the Pacific and the European trade strategy in this region. Asia-Pacific region, traditionally there is a concept of open regionalism. This is somehow, a combination of openness and regionalism. But from the start of this regionalism, we maintained openness. Therefore, a European case started with the customs union, more solid institutional framework, and Asian Pacific more informal and flexible. But recently there had been a big step taken by Asian countries. There are 2 mega FTA established. One of them is the CPTPP, United States withdrawn from this CPTPP when the President Trump appeared and withdrawn. But Prime Minister Abe played a leading role to maintain the TPP-11. Even though TPP-12 is disappeared, but shall we consolidate remaining countries' TPP? They maintain this framework, and we reached CPTPP. And this is one of the big achievements in the face of fragmentation of the world economy, and also the US-China rivalry, geopolitical frictions. And another big achievement is, I find this is ASEAN-led, achievement, this RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And this is another big mega, FTA. We have 2 mega FTA. I find the Prime Minister Abe exercised the leadership to maintain this TPP-11. It demonstrated mid-power countries, strength in the global economy. Even though in the absence, US will maintain the rule-based economic order in this region. And also, Japan concluded with the EU the economic partnership program, and this is another big achievement, that encourage the power of middle power countries, these 2 achievements. So, in addition on this movement, it was a big surprise that the United Kingdom just jumped into CPTPP. But I find that it's okay because we are open. Even though UK is outside the Indo-Pacific, we welcome, we are open, maintain. If the quality is enough, then we allow the UK. And I find this is a kind of movement from this regional mega FTA movement to super regionalism, And I want to ask the European Union, why not the European Union join CPTPP? So a European Union already a member of ASEAN regional forum, This is quite open and flexible, and but consulting each other and confidence building activity and so on, and generate the more friendship among the member countries. So already Europe is a member of this Asian regional arrangement, and we made some econometric exercise. If the EU joined the CPTPP, together with the UK, how about the gain of Europe, among the Japan and the existing TPP-11 and the UK plus Europe? The relative gain is larger, comparatively speaking, if we the zero tariff policy adopted. This is the exercise, and the relatively large gain obtained by the European Union and the United Kingdom. So this is another merit for the European Union. And also, recently there is a meeting between Xi Jinping and also Biden. President Biden invited Xi Jinping to the APEC summit meeting. And I find they would not talk about the economic order in Indo-Pacific, maybe more immediate issues they talk each other. But what is important, what is the future international order in this Indo-Pacific? There are 3 scenarios. One is dominated by China based on the RCEP, and another one is if US comes back to CPTPP, the CPTPP-based, one, this is the second possibility. But it's quite unlikely US will be back to the CPTPP. The third scenario is Japan, ASEAN, and New Zealand, Australia, taking the role of, further expanding and reaching finally the FTA-AP, Asia-Pacific Free Trade Arrangement. And we made some exercise, econometric exercise. And the huge gain obtained by China, if this great, FTA, and US gain is so small, But anyway, this suggests the third scenario. That I want to promote this third scenario, that middle countries' power encourages the movement of more open regionalism in the Pacific. And so one of the problems I find, that Indonesia, for instance, this may be the future Big Five, they adopt tendency to adopt the resource protectionism, nickel. They have the large share of production, 30% of world production of nickel. But they adopted the export ban of manufactured nickel. This is a problem for us. This is a supply chain of critical mineral is a big issue. And but now Indonesia and other ASEAN countries taking tendency of protectionism with respect to this critical mineral, because they want to establish hub of electric vehicle and a battery. Critical mineral is so important for this industry. But at the same time, the problem is Chinese firms, multinational firms, made a big foreign direct investment in this area. So domestic development strategy associated with this export ban. Just the EU is just brought this case to WTO. WTO found, this is not consistent. But despite this, still there's a tendency. How to this, constrain? And this leads to the importance of global, a free and open trading system.
So thank you very much, and of course with this open invitation also to EU, let's look at it, and the critical raw materials just high on the agenda here. Also this week I will open up for questions. I still think we have at least 15 minutes for questions. So if we take 3 at a time, and then we see how far we will get. Yes, there was one there. So if you start, then 2 more. Or are you already hungry? Yes. And please identify yourself.
Yes. Hello, yes. My name is Pascal Juncker from Luxembourg Strategy from Luxembourg. So we do foresight for the Ministry of the Economy. I have a question when it comes to evaluating the costs of the transition. Mr. Pisani said 2% of global GDP every year for 20 years. Are there numbers for, that's basically technology based, so how much gains and emission reductions are to be have in nature-based solutions and in behavioral change? Like for instance, the work Pisani Mazouf did for France Stratégie has also an evaluation of sufficiency up to 17% of emissions reductions. Would that be a way forward for the European Union if we would quantify how much is in nature-based solutions and in behavioral change, because they need much less raw materials? And then I also would like to ask, is there a quantification of how much costs adaptation? Because when we say 2%, there is hardly a correct number on the bill we will have to pay for adaptation to climate change and biodiversity loss.
Okay, thank you. And then Pavel is to the here. Yeah,
my name is Pavel Šveboda from the European Policy Center and the International Center for Future Generations, and also in this very vein, focusing on the climate action, which has been identified as the locus of hope for global governance here. So how much of our attention should be focused on carbon pricing in order to get a more advanced type of agreement internationally, given that only from 23 to 30% of global emissions are priced at the moment? The first is a World Bank figure, the second is an IMF figure. There is progress, so there is incremental evolution. That's good, but can we think of a global agreement that attaches different carbon prices for different types of categories of countries? So can we have a level of differentiation that there with financial support provided for those who need it most?
Thanks a lot. And then the third question is over here.
Hi, Bart Scheftrick at Covington Burling and the German Marshall Fund. Thank you very much for your remarks. My question is about one big economic issue for Europe, which is who will pay for Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction? The bill is already in the several hundreds of billions of euro. The obvious entity that should pay is Russia. And my question relates to the state assets, Russian state assets, which are currently frozen in Europe. The European Council has directed the Commission to develop a proposal to tax the windfall profits. And the question is whether you can go further and go after the underlying assets. Now, there have been a number of political, economic, and legal issues raised. On the legal side, the Parliament has recently put down in a draft regulation that you can invoke collective countermeasures and collective self-defense as justification for confiscation. On the political side, there's probably a strong argument to go after the assets now rather than wait to a future point in time when you might be dealing with hopefully a more friendly Russian government. But my question for you especially was on the economic side. The FT had a piece a week and a half ago that there aren't real economic concerns with confiscating these assets because something like 90% of World Bank government reserves are in the West, and so where are these assets going to go? And so the arguments that are sometimes put forth by the European Central Bank are maybe a little bit exaggerated or overblown, but I wanted to get your take on this specifically. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So sort of two set of questions. I don't know, Jean, if you want to kick off?
Not on everything, but perhaps on some questions. Starting with a question about the investment and the role of sufficiency in the transition. You're right. I mean, sufficiency plays a secondary role. Clearly, is bound to play a secondary role. Because behavioral changes are hard to bring about, and I think the charm of relying on the substitution of capital for fossil fuels is that it doesn't force you to change your behavior. Now, clearly there are limits to this approach. The limits are first that some changes, some behavioral changes do not, some emission reductions cannot be done through substituting capital for fossil fuels. Take agriculture. Agriculture is very much, depends very much on behavioral changes on the part of consumers. Take the use of planes, for which the technology is not yet there. So there need to be behavioral changes in the direction of sufficiency. The estimate, but it's not a very strong, it's not a number I would put my head on the sur le bio, sorry, about is some 15% of the reduction of emission. I think that would already be a significant contribution. Now, the point on adaptation is really important. I think we have underestimated the requirements of adaptation. We have underestimated the investment it will imply. And the numbers we have are nowhere near the likely cost of adaptation. Uneven, obviously, depending on where you are. For some countries, adaptation can even be, bring some positive gains. But for many countries, it implies, heavy investment, and be it for dams in the Netherlands, or be it for preparing for heat waves in some other countries. I mean, so those are absolutely important dimensions. A word on carbon pricing, if I may, to answer the question by Pavel. Well, economists consider that carbon pricing is a natural way to go. It's much more efficient than to work on the basis of regulation or to work on the basis of subsidies, and I think that's for sure. But the political reality is that the US is simply not ready to introduce carbon pricing. And as long as the US is not ready to introduce carbon pricing, we're going to go for a mixed system. The EU is fairly advanced in terms of relying on carbon pricing through the ETS system and its extension. Rest of the world is significantly behind.
Okay, maybe just to prepare for a couple of other questions, I think the ETS is also sort of our main response, because we don't have the same possibilities for using carrots as the Americans have done with tax benefits. But maybe Maria, turn to you, and I don't know if you can also pick a little bit on the sanction question.
Yeah, on the central bank assets, on Russia's central bank assets. Okay, so there's a couple of things to say here. So we are not talking about seizing the assets. We are talking about the income generated from the assets. That's an important thing. There will come a time, I'm sure of that those assets will be used to help reconstruct Ukraine, but this has to be in a very different setup to where we are right now. So all the discussion that we hear is about how can we put the income that those assets are generating to better use. And by better use is sort of providing some of the help to Ukraine. Now, the question of the asset is so fundamental because it touches on property rights. And just following, and I'm not a lawyer, and nor am I a judge, but some of the issues that we are seeing actually in this discussion is how, and I'm still quite amazed about the fact that it is easier to confiscate or to freeze assets of a state than it is to confiscate assets of a person. I think in the eyes of the law, actually easier in the sense that there is, if you were to go to court and seize two assets of a person, that's very, very difficult. So I find that actually quite perplexing. Now, in terms of the Russian assets, most of them are actually here in Belgium. They are being invested, and because of high interest rates, they're generating very high income right now. And that income actually pays taxes to the Belgian authorities. And what we have seen in the past few weeks is that the Belgian authorities use the proceeds of these taxes to send back to Ukraine. But that is actually not seizing assets. This is about using income that they're rightfully theirs. If there was a range of opinion on how easy you should confiscate those assets or either return of those assets, and on the one side, and on the other side, how difficult it might be, I scale on the difficult side. I think we need to be very careful about seizing assets of any sort, even the income of these assets, without broad consensus globally, because it generates problems, and this is actually now what the ECB is talking about. They say that it would generate problems later on in the context of a very fragmented world. Two things has happened since the start of the war. There has been a shift, a global shift out of international reserves of the order of magnitude of 10%. So all international currencies have seen their reserves being reduced by 10%, with the exception of Switzerland, I think, in favor of gold. So there is less trust on the big currencies as a result of the war. And the other thing that happened immediately as the war started is there was a huge interest in creating wholesale central bank digital currencies, simply because when we imposed sanctions on Russia, Russia lost access to euros, lost access to dollars, and lost access to the settlement system, which basically isolates Russia from international trade. And countries fear that they might be next. And that is why they are now having an interest in creating an alternative system where the wholesale CBDC could be a solution to. As I said, it's not for tomorrow, but it is the direction of travel. And I think this is why the EU needs to be part of the conversation of all the standards that are being set right now when it comes to the wholesale CBDC.
Okay, before giving you the floor, Mr. Vavis, Jean, you wanted just a brief note?
Just one question to Maria. From a legal standpoint, what's the difference between seizing an asset, a capital, and the income from this capital?
I don't know what the difference is. It depends on what's on the contract. And I think this is actually the discussion right now, is the income that is generated in Euroclear, where the money rests, is that property of Euroclear, or is this property of the rightful owners, which is, of course, the Russian state.
I can confirm there's a lot of very, very tricky legal issues, and that's why it takes a little bit of time, Mr. Everton.
Okay, thank you. So on the cost of emission reduction, and in the case of Japan, we are going to issue the 20 trillion transition bond, to finance facilitate the emission reduction in Japan. And Japan's policy on this emission reduction may be between Europe and the United States. United States providing massive amount of subsidy-oriented policy on this emission reduction. And the EU is adopting the carbon pricing approach. I find the carbon pricing approach is the first best policy. US case, second best or third best. But the amount of subsidy is so huge. And the speed of adjustment, which would be the first, I don't know. Japan have taken between the two. They're providing somehow subsidy directly. At the same time, we are going to finance the 20 trillion transition bond by introducing the levy on the use of fossil fuel in the year 2028, and also introduction of this ETS auction program. And these are the two sources of finance of 20 trillion yen. I find personally this is too slow. It's a good idea, but movement is too slow. Therefore, my personal judgment, Japan could not achieve 46% reduction by the year 2030. But anyway, this is a way of financing this emission reduction. And also another problem is the generous subsidy, on the for the revival of the semiconductor industry in Japan. We invited TSMC from Taiwan and provided direct subsidy. And also other IT semiconductor companies, Intel and others, we provide subsidy. This is rather different from the traditional subsidy. Subsidy usually oriented toward domestic company promotion, but this is just, I think, this is a de-risking policy. Too much concentration of the high-end semiconductor production taking place mainly Taiwan and Korea. If there is a Taiwan contingency, what would happen? The global, semiconductor industry. It's good to have the more diversification, the location, the production of semiconductor. We provide, therefore, a generous subsidy. This is therefore, I think, inevitable, but we need some kind of international rule, which is different, and maybe some of them WTO inconsistent, because in the United States, they massive subsidy, but the domestic content requirement, attached, and this is not consistent with WTO rules. And how to establish this new rule on this general subsidy? This is another challenge for us.
Thank you very much. And of course, we have been through the same debate, having the same debate on our CHIPS Act and exactly how to do it. I think, unfortunately, we are running out of time. I think we have been seeing raised a lot of very, very tricky questions and showing even more complicated situations and answers, but I think it was very, very interesting. So I would thank the three panelists very much, and of course especially to you, Avatar, for coming all the way from Japan to here. So if you could give them a bit of applause.
Thank you as well from my side as well to the moderator and for the panelists. Thank you for this insight in the global economy. We are having lunch now, and so this is the end of the morning session. Back at 1:30, so it was just 1 hour, and we will have Pavel Sviboda then on stage and in a conversation with Anu Bradford on regulating tech. Please have a look at the drawings here. And have a look, go to the board at the back to leave your comments. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you back here at 1:30. Thank you.